Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 125 Sir Vilhelm cosplay build. So if you're unfamiliar, this was a character from Dark Souls 3 that was really formidable and caused people a lot of problems when they encountered him in the game. Sir Vilhelm is known for having a onyx blade, which is very similar to the Godslayer Greatsword, and he also had a dark hand in his offhand. And we don't have something super similar, but we are going to be using a spiked cestus with Lifesteal Fist, since Lifesteal Fist is very similar functionality to the dark hand. And then he was also notorious for healing quite often, so we'll be using the Frenzied Flame seal to use some healing incantations, as well as Flame Grant Me Strength, which will buff the Godslayer Greatsword. As for our armor, we'll be wearing the Knight's Helm, and then the Knight's Cavalry armor altered, as well as the rest of the Knight's Cavalry setup. We'll also be using the Bulgoat Talisman to give us 69 poise, as well as the Erdtree's Favor +2, Crimson Amber Medallion +2 to be extra tanky, and then this will be our swap around talisman, so if we're invading, we can use the Furl-Fingered Trix Mirror, which is going to make us look like a host to kind of better communicate the cosplay. And then we could put on something like the Claw Talisman, which is a great option if you're going for jumping attacks, or Shard of Alexander if you're using the Ash of War. For this build, we'll be running 60 Vigor, 24 Endurance, 20 Strength, since that's a requirement for the Godslayer's Greatsword, as well as 20 Faith, which is also a requirement, and then everything else will just be going into Dex, so that's 54 Dex with the 125 build, but you could definitely put more in there if you want to scale higher. I'll be running the Flame Shrouding Cracked here, since this is going to boost the fire damage associated with the weapon. You could go for the Dex Knot or the Faith Knot, however, I found the Flame Shrouding Cracked here to produce the highest AR, and then I'll also be using the Crimson Bubble tier to restore HP when I'm close to death. To try to be true to the cosplay, we'll mostly be using the one-handed moveset for the Godslayer Greatsword, since that's predominantly how Sir Vilhelm would use his weapon, but we do have access to a Spiked Cestus moveset, which is going to be really strong. If you want to block and go for heavy attacks that are uncharged, you can really kind of vortex your opponent with roll catches, but we also have access to the running heavy and that true combo with another heavy attack as a follow-up, but we're only really going to be using that in dire situations. For the most part, we'll be using the Godslayer Greatsword, and that has a pretty solid moveset. Its moves come out quicker than the rest of the Colossal Swords, which is great, and then we also have access to this Ash of War, so if you press L2 once, you get just that kind of initial kind of pre-swing, and then the full damage full swing, and then if you press L2 again, you have access to a second follow-up. And that can sometimes catch your opponents off guard. They might think you're done with that first swing that comes down horizontally, and then if you delay it a little bit, you can go for that second one. And if they get hit with that, they'll be taking a ton of damage. We'll also be further boosting that in most cases with Flame Grant Me Strength, so we'll have access to that. And then if we want, we can switch over to the Shard of Alexander to boost the damage further. So you'll see me doing that in some cases, but for the most part, while I was invading, I wanted to have the Trick Mirror on just so I looked more like Sir Vilhelm. The last aspect of this build that might be a little bit controversial is the fact that we're going to be going for heals. So this is very much in line with the cosplay. When you would play against this player in Dark Souls 3, they would frequently heal a bunch, and it made killing them very difficult. So I will be healing in the context of duels in the arena, and we'll be using Lord's Heal to go for that, just because that's the best heal you have access to at this particular faith level. So normally I wouldn't really recommend healing in duels. I think it's not a really well-received tactic, but you definitely can do it if you want to, and for this build I think it really makes sense too. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the build, the moveset, and the strategy. If you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments, and if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I definitely appreciate it. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into the invasions and arena content. Alright, so jumping into our first invasion, we have a 3v1 in a pretty small space, and these players were kind of the ideal situation. So they were not able to maneuver too well, and I was able to go for my Ash of War a couple times. So I got stun locked out of the follow-up in the initial kind of Ash of War usage there, but I was able to go for it a second time without getting stun locked out of it, and just kind of melt two phantoms simultaneously. So I'm not even fully buffed. I don't have the Shard of Alexander equipped. I don't have Flame Grant Me Strength equipped, and I'm still able to kill them with the 2 hits of the Ash of War, so it's definitely strong there. So this is going pretty well, so I decided to go for Lifesteal Fist just to kind of complete the cosplay, and do manage to land it on the host. So these weren't really super formidable opponents, but they were great for kind of showcasing the different elements that are the most fun of this build. So being able to land the Ash of War a couple times and then the Lifesteal Fist was just kind of the cherry on top for that particular invasion. Next up, we have something that's probably a little bit more typical. We have two players. One's very aggressive initially, and I'm able to use that initial iframe when I spawn in to get a decent amount of damage on the Phantom while they're trying to attack me while I have iframes, and then I do manage to get just a running light attack, which comes out at a great speed. I really like the running light attacks, and I'm able to catch that Phantom before they're able to roll. And then the host starts going for the moon attack. I mistimed my jump a little bit. I was a little bit late, so I still took damage from the moon, but went for the Ash of War as kind of a wake up there, and they got stun locked by the PvE, and I was able to land the kill there. This next invasion is going to be another one where we have kind of a mixed bag of skill levels. So we have two Phantoms that definitely aren't too strong, but they are capable of doing a decent amount of damage. We have the Giant Crusher, and then, you know, Shards of Ruin being sent my way. So I'm trying to stay out of range of Shards of Ruin, and then just, you know, not take any jumping attacks from the player with the Giant Crusher. So I hit them once, and then they go for Inescapable Frenzy, which I very much respect. However, I was able to kill them because they had very little vigor, just with a couple of hits. So now it's a 2v1, and I'm mostly focused on the caster here, and do manage to go for a running light attack that misses by just a little bit. I'm also trying to dodge the incoming attacks from the host. So here I go for a trade with their Stars of Ruin, and it's definitely a beneficial trade. I've done about half their health, and they've only chipped me, you know, kind of insignificantly. And the cast time is just a little bit too long for that player, so I'm able to grab that next kind of running light attack and just trade again and take care of that player. So the Rune-Arced host is definitely someone that I probably shouldn't have appreciated the damage that they could do a little bit more. So they hit me with their Ash of War while I'm still in the follow-up animation for my Ash of War. It definitely wasn't necessarily the most effective way to go after this host, but after killing the first two Phantoms, I kind of wanted to have a little bit more fun. So I pull out the Lifesteal Fist again and just see if I can grab it. Lifesteal Fist is very finicky to land. Your opponent can't be roll caught with it, and then there you see I'm just out of range while they're in their Ash of War. So I think the timing was correct, but I was just a little bit far away. So I'm kind of persistent here, and in the meantime, we do have some blues that are going to start spawning in, and that was a moment there actually where I wasn't able to roll catch my opponent. So you saw the damage from Lifesteal Fist, but I didn't actually get the grab. And so finally I'm able to grab Lifesteal Fist. I'm hoping that it's going to be enough to kill my opponent, but it's not quite. And then a Phantom shows up, and this blue is definitely more formidable than any of the others. They have a pretty good strategy here that allows them to maintain pressure on me from a distance, and then their weapon is going to be a little bit faster than mine, I believe. So that kind of combination, as well as some of their passive play, is difficult to deal with. So here I go for a trade, and it's honestly not great, but it was allowing me to just kind of see the amount of damage I was able to deliver with one crouching attack, and it's not a ton. So they're definitely running higher vigor than, you know, some other people you might see at this level, and it's pretty helpful to know that information going into this kind of exchange of blows with the blue here. So I'm trying to continuously avoid the incoming kind of Ash of War from the host. They are rune-arced, and I believe their damage was kind of significantly buffed. They were definitely chunking me more than I would have hoped. And at this point, we do have another blue that does come into the world. So they're AFK, and I know that if I can get the heals from them, that will be great. So I definitely prioritize them a little bit, just because this is starting to get drawn out a little bit more than I was expecting. And that's kind of a cautionary tale when it comes to like playing with your food. So I could have gone after the host in a much more aggressive way before these blues started spawning in, and that would have been a smarter thing to do. But, you know, I'm looking for content and also trying to just enjoy the cosplay build, and having this invasion go from something that was fairly trivial to an actual challenge was a fun way for me to play it. So that's kind of an element I would like to kind of discuss, is just I approach invasions, you know, with kind of my own rules going into them, and it's not always the most efficient way, so you shouldn't necessarily play like that. But if you are, you know, having a cosplay and you want to have fun with it, going for Lifesteal Fist and kind of dragging off the engagement with the host is, I think, pretty fun, and it can lead to more interesting things than just you kind of, you know, killing a bunch of players that are a little bit new. So at this point, I've recognized that the strategy associated with attacking the blue is not really working. They're getting enough coverage from the host to make really getting a lot of burst damage off on them pretty difficult, and then they're also using a nice mix of incantation and ranged attacks that kind of keep me backpedaling. And I'm hopeful that I'll encounter some PvE back here as I kind of pull them down this hill, but I'm not, so that's not really a factor, but it was one that was kind of on my mind as I was thinking about that. So at a certain point, kind of the passive approach where anytime they're the blue does get low on health, I, get hit with some ranged attack, or they go for Golden Land, which sends a bunch of projectiles my way. I just recognize that this isn't working with the Godslayer Greatsword. I need to change up my approach. So, I go a little bit more try hard here and take off the Trick Mirror and start going for some Cestus attacks. And here we can just see how much more effective this particular strategy is in taking care of the blue than the big slow attacks associated with the Godslayer Greatsword. So understanding the limitations of a build and having something to counter, difficult players is really important. You can see it took me like, 2 attempts to get the kill with the Cestus rather than, all these kind of trades that I was going for with the Godslayer Greatsword. So I did want to come back to the Godslayer Greatsword just for kind of the sake of the invasion and get the kill with it. And I do manage to land a couple hits on the host. Once it's just a one-on-one, I stopped kind of messing around at this point and put the Trick Mirror back on just for good measure. But that was definitely one of the more intense invasions of this showcase, and just kind of demonstrates, understanding when a tactic isn't working or when you need to change your approach, and also having something on hand that can be a little bit stronger. So this next invasion is going to be more of a demonstration of an approach that you can have when you don't exactly know what's going to happen, but you want to kind of surprise your opponent. So I think that they're going to be coming down this ladder soon. I'm not sure how many people are there, but I kind of saw a glow that would indicate that, they were nearby. And so I start applying buffs, and my plan is to go for the Godslayer Greatsword Ash of War. So you can see I even take off the Trick Mirror, and here I want to get my second or third swing with that to connect. And here I do get the third swing to connect. I'm not able to reach them with the jumping attack, and I was hoping to land just a couple of fan daggers to knock them back down the ladder, but they're a little bit too fast. They were smart to kind of get out of the way, and so I start coming back up. My hope is not to necessarily kill them here, but I want to get them in another confined space. So I go for a jumping attack. They manage to get out of that spot, and then here I have a great plan with the elevator, knowing that if I can get on there with them and go for my Ash of War, they're going to be in a very difficult spot, especially with their low poise damage weapon. And so I'm able to just get a bunch of damage and kind of take advantage of the small space that we're in. And, really they have nowhere to go. So I definitely recommend that approach, especially with a weapon that's not as optimal as, some of the other Colossal Swords. This definitely lacks range. There were lots of times when I'd go for a crouch poke, and Zweihander or a Guts Greatsword would have definitely connected with that crouch poke, but the particular just range associated with the Godslayer Greatsword was just a little bit too short. So not to say that that was too frustrating or anything, but it was just a limitation that I was aware of. So going for different strategies, trying to take advantage of the Ash of War that you have on hand is going to be an important way to approach cosplay builds at meta level. So this next invasion was kind of a decent back and forth. We have players with, wide sweeping swinging swords, the Ruin's Greatsword, as well as the Ordovis Sword. And I definitely need to kind of manage the space that I'm dealing with. And then we also have the Phantom going for heals. So that's definitely a bit of an issue. And I do manage to land the follow-up attack there with the Ash of War and do most of their health. I'm trying to chase them down, but also kind of wary of the incoming stun locks from the host. And I switch over to the Cestus just because that's a little bit better for chase downs. And I have to go for a heal, and then they manage to as well. So I do get a couple hits with the running heavy attack on the Cestus, but it's just not quite as effective as I need it to be. So I kind of need to back off, regroup, and again, kind of switch back my strategy. I was having more success, I think, with the kind of wide sweeping stun locks that come with the light attacks on the Godslayer Greatsword. When I'm able to stun lock both players at the same time, it's really helpful for just kind of, resetting the fight as well as avoiding stun locks while I'm focused on the Phantom. So eventually I am able to get the Phantom there, and I do go for a couple trades here with the host and the Ruin's Greatsword, but I think they recognize that they're kind of in a bad spot, so they start throwing consumables and start playing a little bit more passively. You can see there that they guard. I managed to guard break them and then get the riposte for no damage, which probably should have killed them, but it didn't. I test that moment as an opportunity to try out the Ash of War as a wake up. It's a little bit too slow. I do manage to land the Black Flame kind of chip damage, but it doesn't do, much more than that. It doesn't do like the 800 plus damage you can see that it will do oftentimes. But my opponent does start kind of rolling down hills and just trying to use their environment to heal, which is definitely the play. And I'm pretty aggressive here. I don't feel like I need to use the Cestus, but at this point there's not too many different areas to run. They're in a hallway that's a little bit, enclosed, and they're fortunate that there's not more PvE, but I start going for some roll catches and ravioli steps and do manage to just get the chase down completed there. Alright, so this next invasion is going to be kind of an intense 3v1. I'm not sure really how skilled these players were exactly, but they were using a lot of zoning techniques and high damage output techniques that really could, make things difficult for me and really take a lot of health away from me. So I definitely need to be aware of that and can't play too aggressively. And I think this is kind of the recommended approach when you are invading at meta level and you have, people going for Waves of Gold as well as Dragon Breath, and there's not a ton of helpful PvE in the mix, and there's also just not a ton of aggressive play we're seeing from the hosts and the phantoms. They're definitely hanging back. They want me to run into them and just kind of eat all of the incoming spam that's coming my way. And I definitely recommend, being patient and not kind of getting baited into that certain death that's associated with Waves of Gold and Dragon Breath and all that good stuff. So I'm throwing consumables. I'm kind of hoping that I can bait at least one of them. Ideally, actually, I'd only bait one of them because if they all come as a group, they'll be a little bit more challenging. But I come in and land a couple hits that manages to stun lock my opponents and then really need to kind of back off, regroup. I don't know what kind of incoming damage I'll be dealing with, and I do manage to hop over Waves of Gold as it comes up the stairs, so I wasn't 100% sure if that would work, but it did, so I was pretty happy about that. And then that Phantom is half health, but again, I do need to back off. We have Rivers of Blood behind me, as well as, some incoming arrows from the repeating crossbow. So I think me running in there has kind of had an effect on them where they wanted to chase me down a little bit more. I've also put on a talisman that will kind of boost my immunity and robustness, so the incoming Rivers of Blood damage will be less likely to cause bleed buildup that, procs bleed. So, I'm trying definitely a little bit harder now. The trick mirror is off. We're going full tilt. And I'm definitely hopeful that I'll be able to kind of bait some of my opponents in. The Phantom that I'm locked onto right now is definitely my ideal target. They haven't gone for a heal, or they're out of heals, so they definitely feel like the weakest link. But instead of trying to deal with the desync issue of Waves of Gold, I try to use the space around me to avoid that. And here is kind of the craziest moment. We have a couple different, Ashes of War and just kind of zoning based spam coming in, but I'm able to finish the chase down on the Phantom that was half health after that jump attack. So, I was pretty happy there and got maybe a little bit more aggressive than I should have against this other Phantom. I kind of felt like, oh, I got one down, I'm pretty good, but their play style has changed kind of drastically, whereas before they were kind of staying back and hoping to spam. Now they really want blood and they're much more aggressive, and that play style and kind of change in play style caught me off guard a little bit. But here we can see the benefit of the ring that I put on, where I now have a very high blood loss meter, but I didn't actually get fully bled, and I have the time to eat a blood bolus. So definitely grateful that I made that switch in the beginning, and it's definitely worth the talisman swap if you have the time and the space, which I very much did at the beginning of this invasion. And I'm able to just kind of, regroup multiple times and figure out what type of approach I want. And so using the uplifting aromatic is also a nice approach here, where I know that the next thing that hits me won't do any damage. That can be really nice, especially when you have high damage, things incoming. And eventually I'm able to trade with Rivers of Blood and get the last HP from the Phantom. At this point, I'm also going for some kind of unnecessary thing. So I go for Lifesteal Fist, which, against a Runar Coast, I know that they're, just one player, but I feel like that maybe wasn't the right play, and definitely taking some trades in the process wasn't worth it. But I am feeling a little bit better about my chances, so I put my trick mirror back on just to kind of optimize the cosplay and begin going for the chase down. The Sypha Peta is definitely something to look out for. You don't want to get caught in, you know, too many stun lock chains associated with it, so having a weapon that can trade with it that has a little bit of hyper armor is great. You'll also see me talisman swap again just so that I can get a little bit more HP from the heal that I'm about to consume, and that type of swap is much more important at meta level than at lower levels, where you're more likely to get, you know, more health than you need from a fully upgraded flask than at meta level, where your, you know, HP bar is much higher. So eventually I'm able to grab a couple more trades and just come out on top for that 3v1, but it was very much one oriented around playing kind of patiently and understanding what my opponents were trying to do and what I could do to, you know, both avoid their incoming damage and just maximize my output in the opportunities that I did have. Next up we have a 2v1 would probably be a generous way to phrase this, but 2 players versus the Godslayer Greatsword, and here I'm able to just kind of utilize my Ash of War and the extra hyper armor that I get to tank some incoming hits and take care of the Phantom that was in kind of a tight spot there on the bridge, and I think they did a smart thing by going for their Ash of War, but I was able to time my roll appropriately. Next up we have kind of the invisible bridge, followed up by a jumping attack on the Phantom that turns this 3v1 into a 2v1 pretty quickly. This one was very difficult with the host once they started using their Ash of War. I was able to kind of isolate the Phantom enough to get a couple good hits on them and chase them down, so that crouch poke there was pretty instrumental, while we do have the Morgoth's Curved Sword coming in for quite a bit of damage, and there I opt to trade with Morgoth's Curved Sword and just get the last bit of HP of the Phantom. And I think that was smart. I could have been bled. It was definitely a close call, but you know, that's kind of the split-second judgments that you just have to make when you're trying to keep an eye on your HP bar and the blood loss meter and the amount of HP that your opponent has. But it kind of worked out there in my favor. And then here I was wondering if I could trade into it with my Ash of War because I know it has some hyper armor. I was definitely wrong about that. The amount of poise damage that their Ash of War does was much greater than the amount that I was able to withstand with the hyper armor of my Ash of War, so it didn't work out there. But once I've kind of decided that I'm not going to just go for my Ash of War, I do land a couple quick hits, stun lock my opponent several times, and come out on top. This next invasion is going to be a 2v1 in Lifesteal, and here I take some time just to get all buffed up. I switch over my talismans just because I'm anticipating this to be a little bit more of a difficult one, and I apologize, I said 2v1 at the beginning, it's actually a 3v1, and here I'm not opposed to baiting my opponents into the PvE, and I'm also utilizing the Spike Cestus a little bit more. So we come in kind of hot and heavy against this one Phantom and just kind of try to avoid the incoming damage of Moonveil. It's definitely tricky to kind of juggle those two things, especially when you have something like the Spike Cestus that has a little bit longer of an attack chain. So if you can land the running heavy followed up by uncharged heavy, it will do a ton of damage, but you stay stationary for quite a bit of time, and Moonveil is great for punishing that. So I switch back over to the Godslayer Greatsword, and then do manage to get just a quick attack on the host there with the Ash of War. So I was definitely happy about how that one went, and just being able to get a kill with just the initial hit of the Ash of War was great. And this next one is just going to demonstrate how useful that Ash of War is in a small space. So we do have kind of the pre-Rykard boss fight area invasion, which is definitely fairly typical. However, I don't think it's the most effective place to have people invade. So if you're actually trying to, go for the boss fight, then I understand. But sometimes I feel like people will just kind of Taunter's tongue in there or try to kill invaders in there. And in my opinion, it's a great place to spawn as an invader because you get the iframes at the beginning and you're able to usually go for a couple quick hits and your opponents have nowhere to go. Next up we have a 2v1, and this is going to be the final invasion of the showcase, and we have a little bit of help from the pests involved. And I go for the Ash of War and do manage to hit my opponent. Doesn't quite kill them, they have very little HP, and I'm continuing the pressure on the Phantom here. However, they're a little bit difficult to get, but the pest does manage to get the last bit of HP, and then I just land a jumping attack to kind of finish that opponent off. So jumping into the duels, it's going to start off with a a pretty skilled player with the Greatsword. We're definitely needing to kind of adjust our timing and appreciate the incoming damage. There you can see just how the little bit of extra speed associated with the Godslayer Greatsword versus other Colossal Swords is definitely helpful. I find that going for a second attack out of neutral is a great approach to go for, just because it comes out faster than the other Colossal Swords, and I think if people are used to the timing, then it can be a bit of an issue. And here I start going for Lifesteal Fist. I feel like I have enough health that it can be worth it. I think my opponent appreciates that, and then I switch up to my Ash of War, and the follow-up is, enough to kind of take their last bit of HP away. So landing the Ash of War in the context of a duel was something that I was pretty happy about, just because it's pretty difficult. So next up we have a one-on-one, and this is a player clearly who's been watching Steelovsky going for the Bloody Helis, some jumping unlocked attacks. So they probably know what they're doing. It's possible that I play with them sometimes on Blade of Maya's stream, but can't be sure. So I do go for a Ballast because they've got the Blood Loss buildup, and I'm not sure if it's just because they recognized me or if they were, thought my build was funny, but they went for their Ash of War like 3 or 4 times in a row and just kind of ate a bunch of hits in the process. So they could have just been messing around. I'm not sure. I haven't confirmed it either way, but I definitely thought that was funny and told them that I would be putting that in the showcase. So next up we have a player with dual Reduvia Bloodblades. And this is something that you absolutely need to approach with aggression if you can. So if they get their Ash of War off, you're going to be in kind of a bad spot, especially if you're close to them. So I was just trying to be as aggressive as I could and keep them stun locked and kind of able to, or keep them unable to combo their weapon into just a couple hits that would get me blood lost pretty quickly. Next up we have a new player, but definitely not bad with their weapon. Maybe they're not a new player, but they don't have like the golden aura around their name. And here I'm just trying to kind of bait them into attacks or avoid the incoming damage while also either trading with them or take advantage of the quick speed associated with my weapon compared to other Colossal Swords. And they're doing a decent job of just dodging incoming damage, but at this point I switch over to Lifesteal Fist and do manage to roll some of their incantations pretty well, and then they roll and start walking right into me, and I think I timed the Lifesteal Fist pretty well, so I was pretty happy to get that in the context of an invasion. I think I would have had, or in the context of a duel, I think I would have had a harder time if, they were, one of the Golden Aura players, and they probably would have avoided that more effectively, but, landing something like a grab in the context of a duel, I think is always fun and really worked well with the cosplay. So I start going for, just anything really to kind of follow up the last bit of HP that I need to. So I think I was playing maybe a little bit more aggressively than I should have. I tried to be patient there and delay a running light attack, but it wasn't quite enough. And then there you see me go for just a quick light attack with my offhand cestus. Don't manage to land it since it does have a little bit of bad range, but does finally to connect on the last moment there where I just kind of walk into them and they were going to go for a swing. So this next player was definitely pretty difficult to deal with. I played against them a couple times and definitely lost at least one of them. And here I go for the heal. So I did say in the beginning of this video I would be going for heals just because it's within the context of the cosplay. So I'm not sure how significant it was in the context of this duel, but I just wanted to, preface that generally I don't condone healing in duels. I mean, you can do it whatever you want, but generally don't use heals in duels. So at this point, it just becomes kind of a spacing battle between their Greatsword and my Colossal Sword, and I'm able to kind of delay some hits, go for some roll catches, and then eventually just kind of space some of their swings and get aggressive and go for a crouch poke to roll catch them a final time. So that was definitely a nice win there. I think had they stuck with their incantations, they might have come out on top. This next player is also using some sorceries and Moonveil, so definitely need to be wary of that, but my running light attack is just a little bit quicker than their Ash of War, and I'm not sure if they were having some inputs eaten, but I felt like their ability to get off their Ash of War was just a little bit delayed, or maybe they were trying to delay it just to screw up my timing, but with the aggressive play style that I was going for, I was able to, grab the stun locks necessary and kind of win out on trades and just go for the attacks that I needed to in the right moment, and eventually I am able to just kind of land one more swing. So that was not too difficult of an invasion, or duel rather, but definitely one that I was happy to come out on top of, and just kind of the approach that I recommend if you're facing Moonveil. Be quick with your attacks and don't let them have too much breathing room. So next up we have a player that I played a couple times, and they were using their Great Spear pretty effectively. It was nice to see just a single Great Spear. I think with all the dual Great Spears in the arena, it can be kind of a breath of fresh air to have an opponent using a Great Spear that's not just jumping attacks and crouch attacks. So they definitely are going for crouch attacks, but for it to be a sweep rather than just kind of the wave dashing dual Great Spear attack that we encounter so much at meta level was pretty nice. And they also had some nice mix-ups with some of their incantations. So this first one was going pretty well, so I decided to go for a Lifesteal Fist. It didn't connect, so I switched back to my Godslayer Greatsword, and that ended up working. But next up we have a duel that was definitely on the sweatier side. So we have a player using it's almost a half stock setup, but they have a straight sword instead of an off stock in their offhand. And I'm going for, just kind of as many stun locks as possible, because I know that I'm going to get stun locked by their attacks just because the poise damage is higher than 133. I'm also not running that high of poise build. And so I need to be wary of kind of the 2-hit combo that they can go for, which is usually a running attack or a crouch attack that comes out as a poke, and that followed up by a slash with the straight sword. So trying to avoid that combo is going to be important, and we're both definitely trying to space each other appropriately and just kind of get reads on the different play styles and understand when damage is going to be coming our way. So they go for Grail's Roar, and I feel like this is the first time that I've effectively dodged that. So knowing what the dragon head looks like is pretty helpful, but it's not that different from the other dragon heads. So trying to keep that in mind is useful. And then I punish Grail's Roar with a heal of my own because they're stuck in that animation. So it didn't end up mattering that much, the heal, but I think might have been a morale-based victory where I was able to just kind of put my opponent in that much more of a stressful situation where they have very low health and I've got just a little bit more. And I go for Lifesteal Fist, definitely wasn't necessary. Would have been kind of funny against this particular build, but, not necessary and really never is. But I switch back to a more, solid setup here where I'm going for some light attacks with the Cestus, and there I do manage to connect one just as they're going for a swing. So I was happy to win that one. That player was definitely, pretty good and had a setup that was pretty dangerous. So this next duel is going to be another sweaty one, and my opponent goes for regen pretty early on, so I try to punish that a little bit on my own by going for Flame Grant Me Strength, and they go for a Frost Pot. They miss theirs, and I'm able to land mine, so I was pretty happy about that, but the damage was pretty insignificant with the regen that they were running, and I do need to really keep that in mind. It's going to behoove me to be aggressive just to kind of ensure that they don't get too much health back over time. And we go for some kind of trades early on. I think Flame Grant Me Strength was pretty helpful, and they switch over to a Spike Cestus with Endure. So this is a very dangerous setup. It can be very hard to deal with that, and they switch over to a Great Bow as well. So that's, they have a lot of very powerful elements of their build, and it's important for me to space them appropriately and not take incoming damage. I'd say this is probably one of the most challenging players that I had in this showcase. So I do manage to free aim another pot, and then with their aggression coming my way, I'm able to just land a jumping attack. So I was very happy to come out on top in that invasion, or duel rather, and it was just kind of probably the strongest player that I faced in this context, especially with their different elements of their setup. So next up we have the last duel of the showcase, and this player was utilizing a Greatsword to pretty good effect. The moveset on this particular Greatsword is a little bit faster than the normal Greatsword, so it has that swing that doesn't hit the ground. And here I go for my Ash of War, definitely not the right play, and they go for theirs, and it's just a great counter to my Ash of War. So that puts us on fairly equal footing when it comes to health, but they aren't playing aggressively, so I punish that with a heal of my own, and then I'm able to actually punish their aggression on the heal with a follow-up attack, and that really kind of changes the tide of that, and I'm able to come out on top for the final duel of the showcase. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. And if you do have an opinion on these cosplay builds, definitely let me know. I've been having fun playing with them, so if you'd like to see more, or if you have any recommendations for a cosplay you'd like to see, I'd be happy to take a look at it. That's all I've got, and I hope you have a good one.